The drive home to Clarksville always seems shorter to me after my work trips. Maybe it's because at 72, every return is a small victory over time and distance. Or maybe it was simply because my old Ford Fusion knew the way by heart and carried me along familiar streets as I pondered the meetings in Nashville. 3 days of counseling at Cumberland Construction had gone well. The young engineers listened to my advice with the respect I had earned over 40 years in the industry, especially when it came to foundations for high-rise buildings, my main specialty. It's nice when your experience is still needed, when you don't feel like a museum piece that everyone is politely waiting for to realize it's time to retire. Unlike at home, where every day reminded me that I was only a temporary resident, though it had been 2 years since I'd moved in with Braden and Lucia. 2 long years. I stopped those thoughts. I shouldn't have spoiled my mood prematurely, especially since in 3 days in Nashville, I'd all but forgotten about the troubles at home. Work had always been my salvation. Ever since I was a young man, when I just started my engineering career, I'd realized a simple truth. Complex technical tasks distracted me from life's complex problems better than any medicine. As I turned off Madison Street onto Oak Street, I slowed down. Our house stood in the middle of the block, an ordinary two-story cottage with white siding and a green roof. No different from the neighbors, except for the fact that Lucia had insisted last year on installing expensive blinds instead of the usual curtains. "It's your money, Harvey," she'd said then. "Don't you want your house to look decent?" Your house? It was as if she'd forgotten it was my son's house. Right away, I noticed an unfamiliar red Toyota Camry parked outside our house. The car was parked just off the driveway, as if its owner didn't want to attract the attention of the neighbors. I slowed down and examined the car closely. The plates were Tennessee local, and the car was 2 or 3 years old but well maintained. On the back seat was an orange work jacket, the kind worn by electricians and other craftsmen. That's odd. Lucia never mentioned that she was expecting guests. In fact, she always detailed her plans, especially when they involved spending. "Harvey, a handyman is coming tomorrow to look at the air conditioner. It will cost $150 per visit. Harvey, I need to see a stylist. A haircut costs $80, but that's a must for Braden's wife." Always with the mention of the price and always with the implication that I would naturally be paying. Braden was supposed to be at work at this time. It was about 4 in the afternoon, and the Prime Motors dealership, where he worked as a manager, didn't close until 7 in the evening. They usually had a quiet shift on Wednesdays, so my son rarely came home early. I pulled into the garage and turned off the engine. Usually at times like this, I went straight into the house, loudly announcing my return. "I'm home!" I would shout from the doorway, and Martha would always answer from the kitchen or living room. After her death, this habit remained. Only now Lucia answered me, if she answered at all. More often, she was busy doing her own thing, talking on the phone with her friends, watching TV shows, or shopping online. Today, something made me move more cautiously. Maybe it's the professional habit of an engineer. Always assess the situation first, study all the factors, then act. Or maybe just intuition, which becomes sharper with age. Leaving the garage, I noticed that the front door was ajar. Another oddity. Lucia always locked herself in, even when she was home. She said you can't be too careless these days, especially a woman alone at home. But that didn't stop her from forgetting to turn off the iron, leaving the windows open on the first floor, or putting the car keys in a conspicuous place in the hallway. I stopped at the door and listened. The house wasn't silent. There were muffled sounds coming from upstairs, but I couldn't make them out. The TV in the living room didn't work. The radio in the kitchen was silent. Something else. Voices, it seemed, but very quiet. Pushing open the door, I crossed the threshold and stopped in the hallway. I left my duffel bag by the door and looked around. Everything looked the same as usual. Lucia's sneakers stood neatly on the shoe rack, her light jacket hanging on a hook. On the table were the keys to her white Honda Accord and a few advertising brochures. The sounds were coming from the second floor. I was sure of it now. Conversation, and quite animated, though quiet. Maybe Lucia was on the phone with one of her friends. But then where was the other voice coming from? I moved through the living room toward the stairs, trying not to make any noise. Every creak of the floorboards in this house was familiar to me after 2 years of living here. I had learned to walk silently when Martha was sick and often slept during the day, and I didn't want to disturb her. The cancer had worn her down so much that any sudden sound hurt. Martha. It's strange how often I think of her in this house. Maybe because everything here is a reminder of how different family life can be. With Martha, 44 years were filled with mutual respect and understanding. We argued, sure, but never belittled each other. She never counted my money or insinuated that I owed her anything just because we lived under the same roof. After her death, the empty house on Maple Avenue really became unbearable. Every room screamed Martha's absence. Every object reminded me of her. Her coffee mug in the kitchen, her books on the bedside table, her garden that she had loved so much. Braden saw me suffering and offered to move in with them. "Dad, it'll be too hard for you there alone," he said, sitting in the kitchen of our old house a month after the funeral. "Ooh, we have plenty of room, you won't be alone. Lucia's in favor of you moving in with us too." Lucia nodded then, looking genuinely interested in helping her widowed father-in-law. Even offered her services to clean the house before the sale. How naive I was, or just desperate. Loneliness at 70 isn't romantic, it's daily torture. Especially when you're used to always having someone around to share thoughts with, discuss a book you've read, or just be quiet over a cup of coffee. As I walked up the stairs, I thought back to those first few months together. Lucia was really trying, cooking my favorite meals, asking me how I was feeling, buying me books on Civil War history that I loved to read. She even set up a comfortable workspace in the guest bedroom, which became my room with a large desk and a nice lamp. The sale of the house was quick and profitable. The real estate market in Clarksville was active then, and our nice house with a large lot found buyers in a month and a half. The price was even higher than I expected. I deposited the money in the bank. A nice addition to my pension and consulting income made me feel financially independent. Braden didn't even ask about the amount, which I thought was a delicate thing to do at the time. My son never got involved in my financial affairs, as he thought it was unethical. But Lucia asked a week after we moved in. We were sitting in the kitchen having our morning coffee, and Braden had already left for work at the car dealership. Lucia was in a silk robe, her hair neatly styled, even though the day was just beginning. She was always careful about her appearance. Even at home, she tried to look impeccable. "Harvey, how much did you get for the house?" she asked, stirring the sugar in her coffee. I was just wondering what real estate prices are in our neighborhood right now. I answered evasively, said not bad, and turned the conversation to the weather. But her gaze then became calculating, studying, as if she was counting something in her mind. The sounds became clearer as I climbed higher. Now I could definitely hear two voices, a woman's and a man's. The conversation was quiet, almost a whisper, but the intonation suggested that the conversation was of a very intimate nature. On the upper platform, I stopped and listened. The sounds were coming from the bathroom at the end of the hallway. The door was ajar, light shining through the crack. I quietly moved closer, trying not to step on the creaky boards against the wall. I stopped by the bathroom door, which was a few centimeters ajar. Enough to hear what was going on inside, but not enough to be noticed. The voices became intelligible. "Be careful," Lucia said softly. "I don't want the neighbors to suspect anything." "Who's going to be watching at 4 in the afternoon?" answered a man's voice. "Everyone's at work." I knew that voice. Curtis Buckley, our neighbor across the street, a divorced electrician in his 40s who always greeted Lucia in an overly friendly manner when we met him on the street. Tall, athletic, with thick hair and a white-toothed smile. Braden even joked, "Curtis has a thing for beautiful women. It's a good thing I have such a loyal wife." Now everything fell into place. The red Toyota Camry belonged to Curtis. I'd seen it in his yard many times. I just didn't immediately recognize it out of context. "What if Harvey comes home early?" Lucia went on, and I could hear the worry in her voice. "You said yourself that he was on a business trip until tomorrow night. Plans change sometimes, especially with a boring old man like that." Boring old man. That's what she said about me when she thought no one would hear. Curious, but in person she was always polite, almost subservient. "Harvey, how's work going?" "Harvey, can I get you some tea in your room?" "Harvey, I'm so worried about your health at your age." Through the crack in the door, I could see part of the bathroom in the mirror above the sink. Lucia was standing with her back to me, her long brown hair loose and slightly damp. She was in her underwear, an expensive lace set that she clearly hadn't bought for home time. Curtis had his arms around her from behind, his hands sliding around her waist. He was shirtless, jeans unbuttoned. The picture was more than eloquent. Strangely, I felt neither shock nor rage. My first emotion was relief. I finally had a valid, irrefutable reason for something I was already planning to do sooner rather than later. To leave this house and start living on my own. Because in the 2 years we'd been together, I'd accumulated enough grievances against Lucia, but they all seemed petty, unworthy of serious conflict. Can one complain to his son that his wife spends his father-in-law's money too freely? Or that she had gradually turned me from a welcome guest into an unwanted sponger? And it all started so subtly. At first, Lucia was really attentive and caring. In the first months after the move, she cooked me my favorite meat and potatoes on Sundays, bought in the store the kind of coffee I preferred, even enrolled with me in Italian language courses at the local college. I felt like I had found not just a roof over my head, but a real family. After Marta's death, this was especially important. At 70, loneliness is more acute than when you were younger. There is no energy for an active social life. The circle of friends narrows naturally. Someone dies, someone moves in with the children, someone simply stops leaving the house because of illness. But gradually something began to change. Little things at first. Lucia began to rearrange my things in my room without asking permission. It's more convenient, it's more correct, it's more beautiful. My history books disappeared from the living room shelf and moved into my bedroom. Harvey, the living room is shared, and your old books don't really fit the decor. Then she started making remarks about my habits. Harvey, you watch the news too loudly in the evening. Why don't you buy some headphones? Harvey, you shouldn't get up so early on weekends. You creak the floorboards and wake up the whole house. Harvey, your friends are calling at inappropriate times. Why don't you ask them to call earlier? My friends, few in number but loyal. Bill Connors, with whom we've been friends since university. Frank Allen, my former colleague at the engineering firm. Jim Stokes, a neighbor on Maple Avenue who often stopped by my checkers after Martha died. All of them gradually stopped calling. Not because I asked them to, but because talking in Lucia's house became uncomfortable. She didn't forbid me from taking calls, but she was always nearby, listening, sometimes commenting. Harvey, you've been on the phone too long. Your phone bill is going up. And when one of my friends suggested we meet, she immediately reminded me of my age and health. Harvey, are you sure you should go out in this weather? What if you catch a cold? Caring. Everything seemed like caring. But gradually I realized it was control. Gentle but insistent control over every aspect of my life. You look especially beautiful today, I heard Curtis's voice, and I was brought back to reality. And you're especially pushy today, Lucia laughed. You're not usually this impatient. Usually. So this wasn't the first time this had happened. I wonder how long their affair has been going on. And more importantly, did Braden know about it? My son. He loved his wife so much. They met 5 years ago at some corporate event. Lucia was a receptionist at a medical center, modest and shy. Braden was 30, just promoted in a car dealership, feeling like a successful bachelor, ready for a serious relationship. I remember the first time he brought her to our house. Lucia wore a simple blue dress, hardly any makeup, spoke quietly and politely. Martha loved her at once. Such a sweet girl, my wife said after they left. And she really loves Braden. You can see it in her eyes. Maybe she did then. Or maybe she just played the part well. Women can be amazing actresses when it comes to marriage, especially when they see a man in front of them with a good job, steady income, and prospects. Braden married her a year after they met. The wedding was small but beautiful. Lucia looked like a princess in a white dress that cost more than my monthly salary as a consulting engineer. Daddy, Braden said then, I'm so happy. I finally found my soulmate. Half. If only he knew how many other parts that soulmate turned out to have. The first 2 years of their marriage went smoothly. Lucia worked. They rented a small apartment, made plans for the future. Martha was alive then, and she and I often invited the young ones over for dinner. Lucia always came with flowers and compliments, helped in the kitchen, asked about family recipes. But when Marta fell ill, something changed. Lucia started showing up less often. First, she cited work, then fatigue, then simply that hospitals upset her. Harvey, I'd rather make something delicious for Braden at home. He gets so tired visiting his mom. In the last months of Martha's life, I hardly saw my sister-in-law. She only showed up for the holidays and not always. At the funeral she came, of course, in a beautiful black dress, cried beautifully and touchingly. Everyone said what a devoted and loving daughter-in-law she was. And a month after the funeral, it was Lucia who suggested that Braden call me to come move in with them. Your father shouldn't be alone like this, she told her son when she thought I couldn't hear. It's our family duty. Family duty. Beautiful words. But I realize now that she wasn't interested in my state of mind, but in my finances. The house on Maple Avenue was worth a lot of money, plus my pension, plus my counseling income. For a young family renting an apartment, it was a very attractive prospect. I need a shower, Lucia said, and I heard the sound of water running. Would you like some company? Curtis offered. Not tonight. I have chores to do around the house. Chores. I wonder what kind of chores a woman who hadn't worked in a year and a half had. After she moved in with me, she quit her job at the medical center. Harvey, now I have the opportunity to do chores around the house and family. That's what every woman dreams of. And she did. Mostly spending my money on home improvements, clothes and cosmetics. Harvey, Braden's wife needs to look her best. Harvey, the house needs renovations, especially the kitchen. Harvey, we need new furniture in the living room. This one is getting old. She justified each purchase either by necessity or concern for me. A new TV was bought for my convenience. The old one was small, and at my age you have to protect your eyesight. An expensive coffee machine was needed for my health. Instant coffee is bad for my heart. The massage chair was purchased purely out of concern for my aching joints. Gradually, I began to notice that Lucia herself was the one who used it all. The TV was showing her favorite shows, the coffee machine was making lattes with syrups I couldn't stand, and I saw her in the massage chair more often than I sat in it. But the most unpleasant part started about a year ago, when she began to openly commandeer the house. Harvey, don't leave dirty dishes in the sink. Harvey, take out the trash on Tuesdays and Fridays. It's your responsibility. Harvey, your pills need to be kept in the medicine cabinet, not on the kitchen table. Responsibilities. I got responsibilities in a house I was actually paying for. Because when the issue of utilities, repairs, and groceries came up, it turned out that Braden's paycheck was barely enough for a car loan and personal expenses. Dad, the son said, looking embarrassed, we'd love to pay for everything ourselves, but we can't do it yet. Maybe you could help with the expenses for the first while? The first time stretched over 2 years. I paid for utilities, groceries, repairs, new appliances. All the while, Lucia called me family and told me how happy she was that we were all living together. The sound of pouring water stopped. I could hear Lucia getting out of the shower, the door of the locker creaking open, apparently to get a towel. Curtis was saying something softly, but I couldn't make out the words. It was time to leave. I'd seen enough to understand the situation. Now I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. And that's when I hatched a plan. Carefully backing away from the bathroom door, I started down the stairs. Each step required the utmost caution. If a board creaked at the wrong moment, the whole operation would be ruined. And it had to be an operation carefully planned and flawlessly executed. I stopped in the living room and looked around. Everything looked normal. Lucia clearly hadn't expected to be taken by surprise. On the coffee table were her glossy fashion and interiors magazines, and on the shelf were the candles she bought for $50 apiece. Harvey, aromatherapy is good for the nervous system at your age. Pulling out my phone, I found the number for Prime Motors, the car dealership where Braden worked. My son had to see it with his own eyes. No one would believe a 72-year-old father's stories about his beloved wife's infidelity, especially when that wife knew how to play the part of the perfect spouse in public. I remembered well how she'd behaved at Braden's last birthday party 3 months ago. Several co-workers from the car dealership and their wives had been invited. Lucia had been a model of hospitality, cooking all day, setting the table like it was for a wedding, greeting the guests with a movie star smile. Your son married an angel, Mike Brett, a senior manager at the car dealership, said at the time. Wives like that are rare these days. And his own wife, Sarah, added, Lucia, you're a marvel. Your house is perfect, your cooking is divine, And you take such good care of your father-in-law. Caring. If only they knew that this caring consisted of constant hints that it was time for an elderly person to consider a nursing home. Harvey, Sunset Manor has such nice facilities, and it will be easier for you. You don't have to worry about household chores. Harvey, I saw an advertisement for a new retirement complex. It even has a library and a billiard room. But when she was visiting, she was charming. She served me first, asked me how I was feeling, called me Dear Daddy Harvey. Braden glowed with pride in his wife, and I smiled and played the part of the happy father-in-law. Now I had an opportunity to show my son the truth, but to do so, I had to act quickly and precisely. The first order of business was to get out of the house undetected. I couldn't go through the front door. The squeak of the hinges would alert them, and the front door in this house did creak all over the place, even though I'd suggested Lucia grease the hinges. Harvey, why? At least that way we can hear when someone comes in. The back door through the kitchen was almost silent, though. I made my way quietly into the kitchen, careful not to hit the chairs around the dining table. On the windowsill were Lucia's orchids, another of her expensive passions. Harvey, beautiful flowers create positive energy in the house. Positive energy for $300 a pot, even though she couldn't even grow parsley in the vegetable garden. All her attempts to start a vegetable garden ended with her buying ready-made herbs at the supermarket and transplanting them into the beds. And when I tried to explain the basics of gardening to her, she'd say, Harvey, I don't have time for such trivial matters. I have more important things to do. Important things. Now I knew what they were. The back door opened without a sound. I stepped out into the small garden behind the house and looked around. It wasn't much, but Lucia had spent thousands of dollars on it. Ornamental shrubs, expensive garden furniture, an auto irrigation system. Harvey, a beautiful garden increases the value of the house. It's an investment in the future. An investment in the future. I wondered if she'd included an affair with her neighbor in her future plans. Walking around the house, I made my way to the garage. The keys to the Ford were in my pocket. I started the engine and carefully pulled into the driveway. Only when the house was out of sight did I catch my breath. Now I had to find a place from which I could watch the house and still remain unnoticed. I stopped on a neighboring street, Willow Street, from which I had a good view of our Oak Street. From here I could see Curtis's red Toyota and the driveway to the house. Taking out my cell phone, I dialed the number of the car dealership. Prime Motors, good afternoon, the familiar receptionist answered. Hello, Jenny. This is Harvey Stone, Braden's father. May I have him on the phone? Of course, Mr. Stone. I'll put him through. Jenny Morgan had worked at the car dealership for 10 years, knew all the employees and their families. Lovely woman in her 50s, divorced, raising 2 daughters alone. Braden always spoke warmly of her, said Jenny was the soul of the team. Dad? Braden sounded surprised. You're supposed to be in Nashville until tomorrow. There's been a change of plans. Listen to me carefully and don't ask questions. Come home right now. Right now. There's something you need to see with your own eyes. What's wrong? Are you all right? Is Lucia okay? I'm fine. And about Lucia, you'll see for yourself. I repeat, come immediately and don't tell anyone you're coming. It's very important, Braden. There was a pause. My son was obviously trying to figure out what was going on. But he always trusted me, even when he didn't understand my decisions. Okay, Dad, I'm on my way. I'll be there in about 15 minutes. I'll see you then. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my seat. 15 minutes. A lot could happen in that time. Curtis could leave, Lucia could shower and change, and then no one could prove anything. But the risk was justified. As I sat in the car and watched the house, I thought about how Braden would take what he saw. My son had never been suspicious. He was used to trusting people, especially those he loved. It was a quality that made him a good manager. Customers sensed his sincerity and were eager to buy cars from him. But in his personal life, this trustworthiness sometimes played a cruel joke on him. Back in school, he was friends with guys who took advantage of his kindness. At university, he dated a girl who spent his scholarship on fun with other guys, and was now married to a woman who, as it turned out, didn't fit his ideas of fidelity. I remembered how they'd met. Braden was working as a salesman at the same car dealership, just starting out. The salary was small, but he was enthusiastic and full of plans for the future. Lucia appeared in his life just at the moment when he got his first promotion and felt like a successful man. She worked as a receptionist at Clarksville Health, a private medical center, a fairly prestigious place. They'd met at a company party. The medical center and the car dealership had partnered on some kind of employee insurance issue. Braden recounts noticing her right away. Dad, she was so elegant, demure, not like the other girls at the party, talked softly, smiled shyly. And when I came over to meet her, she even blushed. Blushing. Perhaps it was sincere then. Or maybe even then she was already calculating her impression on the potential groom. Who knows where natural shyness ends and well-thought-out strategy begins? For the first few months, they dated rather modestly. Dinners in inexpensive restaurants, trips to the movies, walks in the park. Lucia didn't demand expensive gifts and entertainment, which pleased Braden. Dad, she's so unpretentious. Other girls start hinting at jewelry and expensive restaurants, but Lucia is happy with a bouquet of daisies. But I remembered how carefully she'd scrutinized our house when Braden had first brought her to our house for dinner. Her appraising gaze glided over the furniture, the paintings, the electronics. She asked about the neighborhood, about real estate prices, about my job and retirement, all as if out of polite interest. But the questions were too specific for casual conversation. Martha was enamored of her son's daughter-in-law at the time. Such a well-mannered girl, said the wife after they left. And you can see that she loves Braden. And most importantly, she respects her elders. Not like the girls of today. Respects her elders. Yes, Lucia was a model of respect back then, helping me put on my coat, serving me first at the table, asking my opinion on everything. Harvey, what do you think of the new mayor? Harvey, what movies do you like to watch? Harvey, tell me about your job. It's so interesting. The wedding was beautiful, though expensive. Lucia dreamed of a celebration like a fairy tale, and Braden tried his best to fulfill her wish. A dress for $2,000, a restaurant for 100 guests, music, flowers, a photographer. The young family went into debt, but they were happy, and I helped them with the down payment on the apartment. $15,000, a considerable sum. But I wanted my son to start a family life in a decent place. Lucia then cried with gratitude and promised that she would return the money when they got back on their feet. The money was never returned, but that was not important. What mattered was that it was then that I first noticed how Lucia's expression changed when it came to finances. Gratitude mixed with some kind of calculation, as if she were assessing my options and planning how best to use them. The red Toyota was still parked outside the house, so Curtis wasn't leaving anytime soon. Good. Cell phone rings. The more evidence Braden saw, the better. I looked at my watch. It had been 10 minutes since I'd called. My son should be here any minute. The car dealership was a 20-minute drive from our neighborhood, but Braden drove fast and knew all the shortcuts. While waiting, I pondered what I would tell my son after he saw his wife cheating. Accusing Lucia of infidelity would be easy. The facts are there. But explaining to him what she'd really been like all these years would be harder, because Braden truly thought himself lucky. Daddy, I'm so lucky to have a wife. Lucia is both beautiful and smart and caring. And most importantly, she loves you so much. She cares so much about your health. He really did not notice how gradually his wife's attitude to his father was changing. Or maybe he did notice, but preferred not to pay attention. Family life required compromise, and Braden could decide that a little friction between his wife and father was okay, as long as everything looked safe on the outside. I heard the sound of an approaching car in the distance. I peered around the corner and saw Braden's familiar blue Honda Accord. His son was driving fast, clearly alarmed by my call. The car slowed down outside the house. Braden got out and looked around, noticing the red Toyota, but not paying much attention to it. He headed for the front door, but I pulled around the corner and flashed my headlights to get his attention. Braden turned in my direction, saw me, and walked toward the car. His face was concerned, but not yet suspicious. He didn't yet know that in a few minutes his world would be turned upside down. Braden walked to my car with a look of confusion on his face. At 35, he still looked young tall, slender, with thick dark hair and kind brown eyes. In his business suit, slightly rumpled from the day's work, he looked more like an anxious student than a successful car dealership manager. "Dad, what's going on?" he asked, leaning against the rolled-down window. "You look weird." I really must have looked unusual. Half an hour of watching and thinking had built up a cold resolve in me that was probably reflected on my face. Not anger, not resentment, just a firm understanding of what needed to be done. "Get in the car," I said. "We need to talk before we go in the house." Braden walked around the car and got into the passenger seat. His anxiety was growing. I could see it in the way he clenched his hands and kept looking back at the house. "Dad, you're scaring me. Did something happen to Lucia? An accident?" "Lucia's fine," I answered calmly. "She's home, and she's not alone." "What do you mean she's not alone? Do we have company?" But she didn't say, "You see that red Toyota?" I nodded in the direction of Curtis's car. "No, it belongs to our neighbor, Curtis Buckley." Braden looked at the car, then back at me. In his eyes, I saw the first sparks of understanding, which he refused to accept yet. So what? Maybe something had broken and he'd come to ask for help, or Lucia had asked him to fix something in the house. I understood why the son was looking for innocent explanations. No one wants to believe the betrayal of the person closest to them, especially when that person swore love and fidelity just a few years ago in front of the altar. "Braden," I said, looking him straight in the eye. I'd gotten back from my business trip early. I entered the house quietly and heard voices upstairs. "Your wife and Curtis are in the bathroom, together, and they're not in there discussing plumbing problems." The son's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. We sat in silence for a few seconds, and I could see the struggle in his mind between wanting to believe me and not wanting to accept the horrible truth. It's impossible," he said at last. "Lucia can't. We're happy. She loves me. We're planning children next year." Children? Another topic Lucia masterfully used for manipulation. "Braden, I want our child to grow up in a good home, with income. Maybe we should wait until we're back on our feet." Getting back on our feet meant waiting until I was dead to inherit. She didn't say that out loud, of course. "Plans come in many forms," I replied. "And facts are what you can see with your own eyes. Let's go." "Daddy, maybe we shouldn't. If you're wrong, it would be terribly embarrassing. And if I'm right, it would be embarrassing to go on living in ignorance." We got out of the car and headed for the house. Braden walked slowly, as if delaying the moment of truth. I understood his condition. No one wants to find out that the life they thought they were happy with was built on lies. At the front door, I stopped and put my hand on my son's shoulder. "Try to be quiet," I said. "Let them not hear us beforehand." Braden nodded, though he looked like a man on his way to execution. We entered the house, and I immediately heard familiar sounds from upstairs. The voices were louder. Apparently, Lucia and Curtis had stopped being cautious. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Braden listened and turned even paler. Now he couldn't deny the obvious. There were two people in the house, and their conversation was clearly intimate. We started up the stairs. Each step was difficult for Braden, and I could see him struggling with himself. Part of him still hoped that there had been some misunderstanding, that everything would be explained in a simple and innocent way. On the upper platform, voices became distinct. Lucia was laughing, and Curtis was saying something to her softly. Then there was the sound of a kiss and a soft moan. Braden froze. In his eyes, I saw the pain that one feels when everything one believes in is destroyed. But at the same time, there was determination in them. He had to see the truth to the end. The bathroom door was ajar, just as it had been half an hour ago. I nodded to my son, and we stepped closer. What Braden saw shattered his idea of a faithful and loving wife forever. Lucia was sitting on the edge of the tub in her underwear, and Curtis was standing in front of her, his arms around her. They kissed passionately and uninhibitedly. "You're so strong," Lucia said, running her hands over Curtis's chest. "Not like some men." "And you're so beautiful," he replied. "And so unhappy married to that boring guy." "Boring guy," that's what they called my son. The man who loved Lucia with all his heart, provided for her, dreamed of a future together. To them, he was just a boring guy to fool around with. Braden took a step forward and pushed open the bathroom door. It swung open with a loud bang, and the lovers flinched, turning sharply toward the door. Lucia's face at that moment was worthy of a photographer. First complete incomprehension, then shock, then panic. She instinctively tried to cover herself with her hands, though it was too late to hide anything. Curtis reacted more quickly. He bounced off Lucia and began pulling up his shirt, which was lying on the floor. "Shit," he exhaled. "Braden, it's not what you think." "What exactly am I supposed to think?" My son's voice was quiet, but he sounded so hurt that I felt sorry for him. Lucia finally found her voice. "Braden, honey, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at work? It's amazing." Even when she was caught in the act, she tried to put the blame on him. It was his fault for coming home at the wrong time. "Dad called," Braden said, keeping his eyes on his wife. "Said I had to see something with my own eyes." Lucia turned sharply toward me, hatred in her gaze. This is all you're doing," she shouted. "You set this up. You've been following me." "I just came home from a business trip," I replied calmly, "and I saw what I saw." "Don't believe him, Braden." Lucia jumped up and grabbed the robe that was hanging on the hook. "Your father hates me. He wants to separate us." It was typical of her to turn into a victim of circumstances at a critical moment. It was everyone else's fault but her own. Curtis pulled on his jeans and tried to slip out of the bathroom. Braden blocked his way. "Where to?" he asked quietly. "Look, Braden," Curtis began, clearly struggling to find the words. "I realize this looks bad, but—" "How long?" my son interrupted him. "What? How long has it been going on?" Curtis and Lucia looked at each other. There was more intimacy and understanding in that look than in any of their words. "A few months," Lucia answered quietly. "But that doesn't mean anything. It's just a passing fancy." "I love you, Braden." "A few months." So all the while she was making plans for her future, talking about children, caring for her husband, she was seeing her neighbor. "A fling?" Braden repeated. "In our bathroom, in our house, while I'm at work making money?" "Braden, please, let's talk calmly." Lucia tried another tactic. "We can talk things through. Find a solution." "What solution?" Her son's voice grew louder. "You cheated on me, in our house, with our neighbor." "It's not cheating," Lucia suddenly shouted. "Cheating is when you have feelings. This is just physical attraction. There's nothing serious between us." She obviously didn't realize that she was making things worse with her words. It was even more insulting to admit to cheating without feelings. Curtis took advantage of the pause and tried to squeeze past Braden toward the exit. "I'd better go," he muttered. "This is your family business." "Stop!" Braden shouted, his voice so fierce that I was surprised. "You think you can just walk away? After what you did?" "Look, I didn't mean for it to happen." Curtis began to defend himself. "It just happened on its own." "Just happened?" Braden stepped closer to him. "You accidentally walked into our bathroom and accidentally ended up with my wife unclothed?" There was tension in the air. I could see that my son was teetering on the brink of a breakdown. All his restraint and manners were fighting the urge to punch the man who had ruined his family. Lucia must have realized it too. "Braden, don't do anything stupid," she shouted. "Would that solve the problem?" "Will it solve what?" He turned to his wife. "Your apology? Promises that it won't happen again?" "Yes, exactly. I promise it won't happen again. We'll forget about it and start over." Forget it and start over. Typical reaction of someone who's used to avoiding responsibility for his actions. Lucia really thought it was possible to erase cheating like erasing notes from a blackboard. But Braden was no longer the gullible husband who could be persuaded with pretty words. "Start over?" he repeated slowly. "What am I supposed to forget? That you lied to me for months? Or that you called me a boring guy?" Lucia realized they'd heard the conversation. "That's not what I meant." She tried to correct the situation. "They're just words, meaning nothing." "All your words mean nothing," Braden said and stepped aside. "Get out, both of you, now." It didn't take Curtis long to beg. He grabbed the rest of his clothes and hurried toward the stairs, clearly anxious to get out of the house and forget this embarrassing incident. His footsteps on the stairs sounded hurried and uncertain, the footsteps of a man caught in an indecent act. Lucia, on the other hand, was not about to give up without a fight. She pulled her robe tighter around her waist and straightened up to her full height, assuming a pose of insulted innocence. It was amazing to watch how quickly she shifted from role to role. "Braden, darling," she began in a voice full of false tenderness. "Shishram, you don't understand what happened. Your father set this whole thing up." "Set it up?" Braden asked, and I could hear the first note of doubt in his voice. That's it. This was exactly what I'd feared. Lucia was a master of manipulation, and even now, caught red-handed, she was trying to twist and turn the blame on me. "Yes," she exclaimed, getting into character. "Think about it. How lucky was it that he came back today? How is it coincidental that he came into the house at the exact moment Curtis was here? It's not a coincidence." I could see the doubt beginning to work in Braden's mind. His good nature was looking for any explanation that would keep the family together. And Lucia understood this perfectly well and took advantage of her husband's weakness. "Lucia," I said calmly, "you're forgetting one detail. I didn't force you to cheat on your husband. And I didn't make you lie to him for months." "A few months?" She picked up on that. "How do you know about a few months? Have you been following me? Eavesdropping? Spying?" "That's clever, very clever." She was shifting the focus from her own betrayal to my methods of discovering it. It's classic accusing the accuser. "I overheard your conversation in the bathroom," I replied. "Curtis mentioned that it had been going on for months." "And you were eavesdropping," Lucia exclaimed triumphantly. "Braden, your father has been eavesdropping on private conversations. That's a violation of our privacy." Braden stood between us, and I could see his mind struggling with common sense and the desire to believe his wife. His face was pale, his hands trembled slightly. The man who an hour ago had considered himself a happy husband was now trying to figure out whom to believe. "Papa," he said slowly, "were you really eavesdropping?" "I went into my house and heard voices," I answered. "I decided to find out what was going on, and I did." "But you could have just called out to us," Lucia continued. "Told us you were coming. You chose to sneak up and eavesdrop. And then you called Braden in to make a spectacle of yourself." She was good. She was very good. There was a grain of truth in what she said that made the accusations believable. I really could have called them out at once. I really did call out Braden on purpose. And that gave her the opportunity to present herself as the victim of a conspiracy. "Lucia," Braden said quietly, "you were cheating on me anyway, with Curtis, in our bathroom." "It was a mistake," she answered quickly. "A moment of weakness. Everyone has moments when they don't act right. Haven't you ever made a mistake?" A momentary weakness that lasted for months. But Lucia had a way of making even the most ridiculous explanations sound almost convincing. "Besides," she continued, gaining momentum, "think about who told you about this. Your father has hated me from the beginning. He never really accepted me into the family. It was a blatant lie. For the first few months after we met, I treated Lucia very warmly. Moreover, I was glad that Braden had finally found a life partner after several failed relationships. He was always looking for an excuse to break us up," Lucia continued, "and now he'd found one, or made one." "Created?" Braden questioned. "What do you think?" Chornabide. Lucia moved closer to her husband and put her hand on his chest. "Harvey is a very rich man. He has money from the sale of his house, his pension, his income from his job, and he's already 72 years old. Who's going to get all this wealth when he dies?" I realized what she was getting at. Lucia was trying to portray me as a calculating old man who's afraid of his daughter-in-law claiming his inheritance. "Sure, he's afraid I'll spend his money," she said softly, "and he's looking for a way to get rid of me. And tonight's play is his plan." "What play?" Braden's voice became uncertain. "Think about it, darling. Why did Curtis come to see me tonight? I didn't invite him. He said he'd gotten a call asking him to come over and fix the faucet in the bathroom, allegedly on your behalf. It was an outright lie, but it was so skillfully told that even I hesitated for a second. And Braden, who wanted to believe any explanation, seized on it. "In my name?" he asked. "Yes. Curtis said he'd gotten a call this morning saying that Braden Stone was asking to fix a faucet." A man's voice, elderly. "And here's an amazing coincidence. Your father's coming back from a business trip at the same time." Lucia wasn't just a liar. She was a brilliant liar who made up stories on the fly to explain all the inconsistencies. But that doesn't explain why you were like that, said Braden, and there was hope in his voice that he could find a reasonable explanation. What is there to explain? Lucia waved her hands. Curtis had come to fix the faucet. I was in the shower when he came in. I came out in my robe to show him where the problem was. And your father ambushed me. And the kissing? The hugging? I asked. What kisses? Lucia was outraged. Are you hallucinating at your age? Curtis was just helping me up when I slipped on the wet floor. Unbelievable. She rewrote reality on the fly, turning a passionate scene into an innocent misunderstanding. And the worst part was that Braden wanted to believe her. Lucia, he said uncertainly. But Dad says he's heard you two talking. About a few months. Talking about what? She asked quickly. Harvey, repeat verbatim what you heard. She was smart. She knew I wouldn't be able to recite their dialogue word for word, and that would give her the opportunity to distort the meaning of what she was saying. You've been talking about how this has been going on for months, I answered, and you called Braden a boring guy. Oh, that's what it's about. Nana Lucia laughed with relief. Braden, do you remember a few months ago when we started having trouble with the faucet? It was dripping or not dripping. That's what we talked to Curtis about. And the boring guy was about his former neighbor who was always complaining about the noise. Each of her explanations sounded plausible in isolation, but together they added up to a picture so strained that only someone who desperately wanted it to be a misunderstanding could believe it. See, darling, Lucia put her arms around Braden's neck. Your father misunderstood our conversation, and what he saw could be explained by chance. But why did Curtis run away so quickly? Braden asked. Nothing. Wouldn't you have run away if an older man had burst into the bathroom and started yelling? Curtis was frightened. He didn't realize what was going on. I watched this spectacle with growing amazement. Lucia wasn't just lying. She was creating an alternate reality in which everything looked completely different. And the amazing thing was that Braden was beginning to believe it. Dad, he said, turning to me, maybe you've really misread the situation. This is it. This was exactly what Lucia wanted, to question my words and make my son choose between his father and his wife. Braden, I said calmly, I saw what I saw. Your wife and the neighbor weren't discussing faucets or helping each other up. They were kissing and hugging and talking about how they've been dating for months. It's his word against mine, Lucia said. And you know which of the two of us is more interested in ruining our marriage. She played on the most painful strings. She insinuated that I was jealous of my son's wife, that I wanted to be the only important person in his life. Lucia's right, Dad, Braden said quietly. You really never loved her? I didn't? I questioned. I took her in, helped you with the down payment on the apartment, let her live in my house. Your house? Lucia jumped up. That's the truth. It's my house, you say. Are we just temporary tenants? She was turning everything upside down again. The house was technically Braden's, but I maintained it. But now it was being presented as proof of my despotism. Harvey, she continued, not to her father-in-law, but to her enemy. You have poisoned our lives with your presence for 2 years, controlling every expense, criticizing my every decision, and now you've decided to separate us completely. That's not true, I objected. Yes, it is. And Braden knows it. Isn't it, darling? Isn't your father always meddling in our affairs? Braden was silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. So Lucia complained to him about me. Perhaps not openly, but continually, drop by drop, making him feel that his father was interfering with their happiness. I never interfered in your affairs, I said. I just lived in the house and paid the expenses. You paid for it and therefore thought yourself the master, Lucia exclaimed. And us as your dependents. She skillfully used my financial support against me. She portrayed my help as a means of control and my generosity as an act of despotism. Braden stood between us, confused and exhausted. I could see the struggle in his eyes, between what he saw with his own eyes and what he wanted to see. I don't know what to believe, he said at last. And in that phrase was the tragedy of the situation. The son did not know what to believe because the truth was too painful and the lies too seductive. Lucia, feeling that she had achieved the desired effect, decided to consolidate the success. "Braden, dear," she said softly, "I must get myself cleaned up after this misunderstanding. Talk to your father calmly. Work it out between you. In the meantime, I'll make us some coffee." She kissed her husband on the cheek and headed for the bathroom, but she stopped at the door and turned to me. "Harvey," she said in a tone that was supposed to be conciliatory, but in which I heard a barely concealed threat. "I hope you realize that today's misunderstanding should not affect our family relationship. We must all be wiser and not yield to false impressions." False impressions. She stood her ground to the last, presenting obvious facts as the result of my hallucinations. When Lucia left, there was a heavy silence in the bathroom. Braden sat on the edge of the tub, head down in his hands. I could see him struggling with himself, trying to understand what was happening to his family. "Dad," he said without lifting his head, "tell me honestly, did you really see what you're talking about?" "Yes," I answered. "I saw your wife and Curtis Buckley kissing and hugging in that bathroom. I heard them talking about how their affair has been going on for months. And I've heard them call you a boring guy." Braden flinched at the last words. "Maybe you're wrong," he asked hopefully. "Maybe it really was a misunderstanding." I understood his desire to find an innocent explanation. No one wants to find out that the person you trust most in the world is lying to you, but a lie, even a comforting one, wouldn't help my son. "Braden," I said, sitting down beside him, "I want to talk to you honestly. Not about what happened today, but about what's been going on for the past 2 years." "What are you talking about?" He raised his head and looked at me. "About your wife. About what she's been like since I moved in with you." "Dad, don't! Not now!" "Not now, because you've only seen the tip of the iceberg today. There's a lot more under the water." I paused to collect my thoughts. I had things to tell my son that would completely destroy his idea of family happiness. But silence was no longer an option. "Hasur, do you remember what Lucia was like when I first moved in with you?" I began. "Of course, she was caring, attentive." "Exactly. For the first few months, she really tried. Cooked my favorite meals, took an interest in my health, bought me books I liked. I even thought I'd found not just a roof over my head, but a real family." Braden nodded. He remembered that period. "But gradually something started to change," I continued. "Little things at first. Lucia started moving my things around without asking. She took my books out of the living room, saying they didn't match the decor. She started making remarks about my habits. Watching TV loudly. I get up early. Friends call at inappropriate times. "But that's, caring," Braden said uncertainly. "She wanted everyone in the house to be comfortable. One in." That's what I thought at first. But then I realized that she didn't want me to be comfortable. She wanted me to feel like a temporary tenant in the house she kept. I got up and walked to the bathroom window. It was quiet and peaceful outside. Nothing foreshadowed the family drama that was unfolding within these walls. "Do you remember how my friends gradually stopped calling?" I asked. "Well, yeah. But you said yourself that at your age, your social circle narrows down. I was just saying that so as not to upset you. In fact, Lucia created such an atmosphere that it became uncomfortable to talk on the phone in this house. She was always there, listening, commenting. When Bill Connors suggested a meeting, she would immediately start worrying about my health. Rain, cold, colds. There was always a reason why I should stay home." Braden was silent, but I could see that he was beginning to remember details he hadn't paid attention to before. "And then the money started," I continued. "First the utilities. You said your paycheck wasn't enough and asked me to help you out for the first time. I agreed. What's the big deal? A family should support each other." "Dad, but we really planned." "We planned, yes. But for some reason the plans never materialized. But there were new expenses. Kitchen remodeling, new furniture, coffee machine, a massage chair, all ostensibly for my convenience, but Lucia used it all mostly." I turned to my son. He was sitting hunched over, and for the first time in 2 years, he was actually listening to what I was saying. "You know what struck me the most?" I asked. "She justified every purchase on the grounds that she cared about me. A new TV so I could see better. Expensive groceries so I'd eat right. Orchids so the house would have positive energy for my health. But is that a bad thing? Braden asked uncertainly. What's bad is that it was a lie. Lucia spent my money on what she wanted, but she presented it as taking care of me. And when I tried to object, she would take offense and complain to you that I was ungrateful. Braden lifted his head and looked at me with a guilty look. She did get upset sometimes. Upset, he admitted, said you weren't happy with her efforts. See? She had a way of portraying my attempts to control my own spending as ingratitude to her care. I sat back down next to my son. I needed to tell him the unpleasant part. Do you know what she's been offering me lately? I asked her. What? To move into a nursing home. Harvey, Sunset Manor has such nice facilities. It'll be easier for you. You don't have to worry about household chores. Harvey, I saw an advertisement for a new retirement complex. It even has a library and a billiard room. Braden's face went pale. Was she saying that? Seriously? Quite. And every time she added that it would be better for everyone. For me, because of the medical staff. For you, because a young family should live on their own. But Dad, she never told me. Of course she didn't, because she knew you wouldn't agree. So she acted subtly, gradually creating an atmosphere in which I myself had to come to the conclusion that I was superfluous in this house. I got up and walked to the bathroom. It was painful, but necessary to tell it all. Do you know what finally convinced me that Lucia hated me? I asked. What? Your mom's birthday. It was 3 years ago this year that she died. I wanted to go to the cemetery like I do every year. I asked Lucia to drive me because I had a bad back that day, and it was hard to drive. Braden tensed. He remembered that day. Do you know what she said to me? I continued. Harvey, why bring up the past? Martha's dead, and no visit to the cemetery will bring her back. Better to spend your time doing something useful for the living. It's cruel, Braden said quietly. Yes. And when I asked you to drive me, Lucia said you had too much work to waste the day on sentimentality. Remember when you apologized to me for not being able to go? I do, but you thought what she told you, that you had really important things to do at work, and really she just didn't want you and me to spend the day together, remembering Mom. Braden dropped his head into his hands. God, Dad, I didn't know. I didn't understand. You couldn't understand because she was very smart about it. In front of you, she was the perfect wife and caring daughter-in-law. And when she was alone with me, she showed her true colors. But why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell me? Because you loved her, I answered simply. Because I saw how happy you were, and I thought I could put up with her antics for your happiness. I even planned to get my own apartment and move out quietly without explaining why. Move out? Braden lifted his head and looked at me in surprise. Yes, I knew I couldn't live in a house where I wasn't wanted, but I wanted to do it in a way that wouldn't ruin your marriage. Dad, and then today I saw her with Curtis, and I realized that your marriage is already broken, and not by me. Lucia ruined it with her betrayal. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Braden thought about what he'd heard, and I gave him time to think about it. I knew that accepting the truth about someone you love is one of the hardest things in life. Dad, he finally said, what if she's telling the truth? What if it really was a misunderstanding? I sighed. Even after everything I'd told him, my son was still clinging to hope. Braden, I said softly, you saw them with your own eyes. You saw them kissing. You heard her talking about you. Do you really think any of this can be explained by mistake or chance? No, he answered quietly. Probably not. Then what are you going to do? Braden was silent for a long time. Then he stood up and looked me in the eye. I don't know, Dad. I need time to think about it. I nodded. Time was what my son really needed to accept the new reality. The next 3 days passed in a strange, tense atmosphere. Lucia acted as if nothing had happened. In the morning, she made breakfast, smiled, asked about the day's plans. A perfect wife and daughter-in-law who had just had an unfortunate misunderstanding and now wanted everyone to forget about it. Braden was silent. He left for work early and returned late, obviously avoiding talking to his wife. At dinner, he gave one-word answers, made no eye contact. Lucia pretended not to notice the change in his behavior. but I could see her face tense when her husband once again averted his gaze. And these days, I made the most important decision I'd made in the last 2 years. There was no more point in waiting, hoping, or enduring. It was time to act. Thursday morning, after Braden left for the car dealership and Lucia headed to the gym, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and started looking for an apartment. The process was easier than I expected. Clarksville had quite a few offerings for single seniors, small one- or two-bedroom apartments in quiet neighborhoods. What caught my eye was an ad for an apartment downtown in an old brick building. 2 rooms, kitchen, bathroom, balcony overlooking a small public garden. First floor, which is convenient at my age. The price was reasonable, $800 a month, which was well within my budget. I called the real estate agent, a middle-aged woman with a pleasant voice named Carol Finch. We arranged a viewing for the same day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had plenty of time to drive over, look at it, and make a decision. The apartment was exactly what I needed. It was bright, clean, with large windows and high ceilings. The living room could accommodate my desk and bookshelves. The bedroom was spacious enough for a bed and a closet, and the balcony did have a beautiful view of the public garden with century-old oaks. The house was built in 1920, Carol said as we looked around the apartment. It was renovated 5 years ago. The neighbors are quiet, mostly older people. There's a grocery store, a pharmacy, and a clinic nearby. Perfect, I said, and it was true. Do you want to rent or buy? Carol asked. Buy. She quoted a price, $180,000. It wasn't much, but it was reasonable for a downtown property like this. I had that amount on deposit in the bank. I'll take it, I said. When can the deal be finalized? Carol looked at me in surprise. Don't you want to think about it? Consult with your family? People don't usually make decisions like this so quickly. I've spent 72 years thinking about where I want to live, I answered. I think that's enough. An hour later, I was in the real estate office signing the preliminary contract. Carol explained that all the formalities would take about a week. Checking the documents, formalizing the title, registering with the state authorities. One of you need it faster, you can speed up the process for an additional fee, she offered. A week is fine with me, I replied. Returning home, I felt relieved. For the first time in 2 years, I had the prospect of living where they really wanted me. That is, where I would live alone and not annoy anyone with my presence. Lucia was waiting for me at home. She was sitting in the living room with a mug of coffee and a magazine, but I could see that she wasn't reading carefully. Probably waiting for me to return to try to talk. Harvey, she said as I walked by. Can I talk to you for a minute? Yes, I said, stopping in the doorway. Sit down, please. I want to talk to you. I went into the living room and sat down in the armchair opposite the sofa where Lucia was sitting. She looked as impeccable as ever. Light jeans, beige cashmere sweater, neatly styled, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Harvey, she began in a soft, almost conciliatory tone. I think there's been a big misunderstanding between us. What happened on Wednesday can and should be forgotten. It can be, I agreed, if you try hard enough. Exactly. We're a family. A family should forgive each other's mistakes and move on. Family. How easy it was for her to say that word when she needed something from me. I can see that Braden is upset, Lucia continued, but it will pass if we all behave reasonably. Men quickly forget trouble when they are surrounded by care and love. What do you suggest? I asked. Let's just forget about this incident. I promise it won't happen again. And you? Well, maybe you could tell Braden that you might have been mistaken about what you saw too? This is it. She wanted me to take it back, admit that I might have misread the situation. That would completely discredit me in my son's eyes and let her get away with it. That's an interesting offer, I said. What do I get in return? Lucia perked up, apparently thinking that I was ready to negotiate. Well, we could discuss your living arrangements. Maybe we could convert the basement into a separate apartment, with its own entrance, kitchen, bathroom. You'd be independent, but close to your family. A separate apartment in the basement. So I'd be out of their way, but still pay their expenses. That's smart. Or, she continued, we could find you a nice apartment nearby. I could help you find it, help you move in. Of course, we'd visit each other regularly. Now she was ready to get rid of me, but in a way that made it look like a mutual decision. Lucia, I said calmly, don't you think you're offering me a reward for my silence? What? No, she said indignantly. I'm just thinking of what's best for everyone. For you, for Braden, and me. I see. What if I don't agree to forget what I saw? Lucia's face darkens. Chia, then you'd have to prove your accusations, which will be difficult, considering you have no witnesses. Except Curtis. Curtis will never confirm your fantasies, she said quickly. He values his reputation too much. So she'd already talked to Curtis, agreed with him that he would deny the affair if anyone started an investigation. Besides, Lucia added, think about Braden. Is it worth destroying his family because you might have misunderstood what you saw? Again, she was shifting responsibility. She didn't ruin the family with her infidelity. I'll ruin it with my accusations. Lucia, I said, rising from my chair, I've made a decision. What decision? I could hear the anxiety in her voice. I'm buying an apartment downtown and moving in next week. She looked at me stunned. Are you kidding me? No, the papers are already signed. But, but you can't just up and leave. What about Braden? What about our family? Our family, I repeated. That's a curious phrase coming from a man who's been cheating on her husband with a neighbor for months. It's not like that, I explained. You explain that I'm an old fool who sees hallucinations? Perhaps you're right. Then I'm definitely better off living apart. Lucia jumped up from the couch. Harvey, wait. Let's discuss this calmly. Maybe we can find a compromise. There is a compromise, I said, heading for the stairs. I'm leaving. You're staying. Everybody's happy. What are you going to tell Braden? She shouted after me. The truth. In my room, I pulled out a large suitcase and started packing. Clothes, papers, a few books that were especially precious to me. The rest could be picked up later or left behind. After 70 years of living, you realize that most things aren't that important. Lucia never gave up trying to change my mind. Every half hour she came into the room under various pretexts. She'd bring tea or ask about dinner or offer to help me put things away. Harvey, she said, I understand you're upset, but should you make such serious decisions when you're stressed? At my age, all decisions are made under stress, when I replied, continuing to fold shirts. But think of the money. Buying an apartment, moving expenses, new surroundings. That's a huge expense. Money. Of course, she couldn't help but mention money. It was painful for Lucia to think of my finances going out of her reach. My money, my spending, I replied. But you do realize it's going to be hard for us too, don't you? Without your help, we won't be able to keep the house. That was the truth. It wasn't my society she was concerned about, not the welfare of the family, only money, my financial support, which allowed her to live in comfort and not work. You'll have to get a job, I said, or Braden will find a way to increase your income. Or you'll sell the house and move into a smaller apartment. There are options. It's cruel, Harvey. It's cruel to cheat on your husband in his own home. But moving out of ungrateful relatives is the smart thing to do. By the time Braden returned that evening, the suitcase was packed. I went down to the living room, where my son was sitting at the dining room table with a plate of warm dinner. Lucia was fussing nearby, serving napkins and completing his plate, but he barely touched his food. Braden, I said, I need to talk to you. Sure, Dad. He put down his fork and looked at me. I bought an apartment downtown. I'm moving in next week. My son froze in a daze. What? Dad, why? Because of what happened on Wednesday? It's not just that. It's just time for me to live on my own. Ha ha ha, but we're a family, Miss Braden said, confused. Why would we want to be on our own? Because a family is when people want to be together, not when some people tolerate others out of politeness. Lucia stood behind her husband and put her hands on his shoulders. Braden, darling, she said softly, your father made this decision out of emotion. Maybe we should change his mind. Daddy, Braden turned to me. Do you really want to leave? I looked at the two of them, the son, who genuinely didn't understand what was going on, and the woman who was standing behind him, trying to manipulate the situation. Yes, I replied. I want to leave, and I think deep down you understand why. Braden lowered his head. Lucia squeezed his shoulders. Maybe we should all take some time to think, she suggested. We don't have to make any final decisions right now. The decision's been made, I said. But if you want to help with the move, Braden, I'd appreciate it. My son looked up and nodded. Sure, Dad. When? Saturday. I'll get the keys on Friday. That's good. I'll take the day off. Lucia pressed her lips together, but didn't say anything. I realized that further attempts to change my mind would only make things worse. Saturday was clear and cool. The October morning in Clarksville smelled of fallen leaves and that special freshness that comes with the first frost. I woke up early as usual, but for the first time in many months, I felt not the usual heaviness of the day ahead, but a strange excitement. Today I was moving into my own apartment. Braden arrived at 8 in the morning, as promised. He brought Mike Brett, his co-worker from the car dealership, a sturdy guy in his 30s who'd agreed to help with the move for a reasonable fee and lunch at a nice restaurant. Good morning, Dad, Braden said, hugging me on the doorstep. Are you ready to move? More than ready, I answered, and it was the truth. In the week that had passed since I'd signed the contract, I'd come to realize that I'd made the right decision. Lucia didn't try to persuade me anymore. She must have realized it was useless. Instead, she adopted a different tactic. She pretended to be a victim of circumstances and sighed sorrowfully at every opportunity. It's a shame our family's breaking up, she said at breakfast when Braden was home. I dreamed of us all living together and taking care of each other. Maybe Daddy would really be better off alone. Braden answered uncertainly. At his age, independence was important too. Of course, darling, if that's what he wants. I'll miss his company, though. Company? The woman who had spent 2 years doing everything she could to make me feel superfluous was now complaining that she would miss my company. But all of that was in the past. Today was the beginning of a new chapter of my life. There was more stuff than I thought there would be. In addition to personal items, I decided to take the desk. Martha's gift to me on my 50th birthday, the rocking chair I'd bought as a young engineer, and the bookshelves with my collection of historical literature. Dad, are you keeping the rest of the furniture? Braden asked as we took the table out. Yeah, I don't see the point in buying new stuff when I have it ready to go. What if you need something? Then I'll buy it. At 72, you only want to surround yourself with things you really need. Lucia watched from the living room window. She pretended to read a magazine, but I could see her looking at us. I guess she was hoping until the last moment that I'd change my mind. As we were loading the books, she came out onto the porch. Harvey, she said in a tone of deep regret, maybe you should reconsider. I'm willing to make any compromises I can to keep my family together. What kind of compromises? I asked without stopping my work. Well, we could give you a separate area of the house, or set up a schedule so no one gets in anyone's way. Or, Lucia, Braden interrupted her, Daddy's made his decision. Let's respect it. She pressed her lips together resentfully and went into the house. She made no further attempt to stop me. By noon, the move was complete. The apartment on Main Street greeted me with a peace and quiet that hadn't been present in Braden's house for months. The high ceilings, the hardwood floors, the large windows that looked out onto the park, all made it feel spacious and free. Nice place, Dad, Braden said, looking around the living room. It's very cozy. And very me, I added. Mike had arranged the furniture just the way I'd asked. The desk by the window so I could work in the natural light, a rocking chair next to the bookshelves for evening reading, a television set in the corner, far enough away so as not to strain your eyes. Where will you have dinner? Mike asked. There's no table. I'll buy one tomorrow, I said. Or the day after tomorrow. There was no hurry. Indeed, there was no hurry. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't have to adjust to other people's plans, take into account other people's habits, apologize for my needs. I could arrange my life at a pace that suited me. After Mike left, Braden and I sat in our chairs and opened the bottle of beer my son had brought as a housewarming gift. Here's to a new house, Dad, he said, lifting the bottle. To a new life, I replied. We drank in silence. Outside the window, the leaves of the century-old oaks rustled. Cars drove by occasionally and children laughed somewhere in the distance. The usual sounds of a Saturday afternoon in a quiet neighborhood. Daddy, Braden said after a while, are you happy? You know, I answered, thinking. Yes. For the first time in a very long time, yes. So I made the right decision by not talking you out of it? The right decision. Braden finished his beer and set the bottle on the windowsill. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. I could tell from his tone that it was going to be serious. I'm listening. I've been thinking a lot this week about what happened on Wednesday, about what you said about Lucia, about our family life in general. And what have you concluded? That you were right. About almost everything. I didn't answer, giving my son a chance to speak fully. I've been thinking about things over the past 2 years, Braden continued. The way Lucia had told me about your peculiarities, how she explained that at your age people become more demanding, more capricious, how she told you to be more patient with your elders. I see. And now I realize she was shaping my perception of you. She was preparing the ground so that I wouldn't be surprised if you had conflicts. Smart woman, my sister-in-law. Understood the psychology of manipulation better than many credentialed professionals. I also remembered Mom's birthday, Braden said more quietly. Lucia did tell me that I had too much work to spend the day traveling to the cemetery, but she added that it would be hard on your psyche. She said you shouldn't bring up painful memories. And you believed her? I did, because it sounded, caring, like she was looking out for your well-being. What do you think now? Now I think she just didn't want us to spend the day together, so we wouldn't have a chance to talk alone. Braden got up and went to the window. He stood looking out at the square, then turned to me. Dad, what about the Curtis story? Are you sure you couldn't have been mistaken? Braden, I said softly, I'm an engineer. I've spent my whole life working with facts, calculations, measurements. I'm used to trusting only what I can verify and confirm. I understand that. It's hard to accept that the person you love is capable of such a thing. Love doesn't make people incapable of betrayal. It's unfortunate. We didn't talk for a while. An old woman with a small dog walked by the window. She stopped near a bench and took a book out of her bag. A peaceful picture of a Saturday afternoon. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know yet, Braden answered honestly. I need time to think about it. To talk to Lucia seriously, to see if there's anything we can do to fix this. And if it can't, then I'll have to consider divorce. The word divorce was quiet but firm. I realized that my son was no longer the gullible husband who could be deceived by beautiful words. You know what makes me the angriest? Braden continued. It's not even the cheating. It's that she spent 2 years lying to both of us, playing the part of the perfect wife and daughter-in-law while behind the scenes she was scheming. It's called a double life, I said. Some people can lead it for years. But why? For what? If she was unhappy with me, why didn't she tell me honestly? Because honesty takes courage, and lying only requires ingenuity. Braden went back to his chair. Dad, I want to apologize to you. For what? For not noticing how uncomfortable you were in our house. For taking Lucian's complaints on faith without looking into the situation. For putting up with things for me for 2 years that you shouldn't have. Braden, it's not your fault your wife wasn't the person she said she was. It's your fault for not protecting your father from disrespect in his own home. I looked at my son, upset, confused, but seeing the situation clearly for the first time in a long time. You know what? I said. Let's not regret the past. Let's think about the future. What future? That I have my own apartment where I can have guests. That you can visit your father without asking your wife's permission. That we can go out whenever we want and talk about whatever we want. Braden smiled, and for the first time all week. That sounds good, Dad. More than good, it sounds like freedom. We spent the rest of the day setting up the apartment. Braden helped us put books on the shelves, hang pictures, hook up the TV and the internet. By evening, the apartment looked like I'd been living here for months, not just one day. Do you have anything to eat for dinner? My son asked me when we had finished setting up. I'll buy something on the way home, I answered, then hesitated. I mean, this is my home now. What does it sound like? Like music. Braden laughed. Daddy, can I come over for dinner on Sundays? Just you and me, without strangers. Oh, sure, I'll make your favorite chops and potatoes. Oh, that's great. I'll see you tomorrow then. My son gave me his usual big hug goodbye. Dad, he said, thanks for opening my eyes. It must not have been easy. It wasn't easy to keep quiet, I said. Telling the truth was easier than I thought it would be. After Braden left, I was alone in my apartment. I turned on the desk lamp and sat in the rocking chair with a book on Civil War history. Outside the window, dusk was thickening. The lights on the houses across the street were coming on. Silence. Peace. No one to make remarks about the brightness of the lamp or the volume of the television. No one to calculate my expenses or plan my life. Just myself, my books, and my freedom. At 9 p.m., the phone rang. The number of Bill Connors, an old friend of mine, popped up on the screen. "Harvey," a familiar voice answered the phone. "I heard you'd moved. How's the new apartment?" "It's great, Bill. Couldn't be better." "What about tomorrow night's game?" "The Titans are playing the Colts. You want to watch it together? I can stop by your place." I smiled. Bill hadn't called me in months, but once I moved away from Lucia, he showed up right away. "Sure. Come over at 2. I'll make sandwiches and chill the beer." Chuckles. "Great. See you tomorrow, buddy." "I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up and went back to my book. Tomorrow will be Sunday. In the morning, breakfast alone with the newspaper rustling. In the afternoon, soccer with a friend I haven't seen in ages. In the evening, dinner with my son, who would finally be able to speak frankly with me. At 72, I have something I haven't had in a very long time. A life of my own, and it's been wonderful.